Hello everyone, this is part 11 of What If Naruto formed a new team, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. What a charming place, Haku muttered as his dark eyes settled on the prodigious trees caged by a wire fence. He flipped a stray strand of hair away from his face as Gaara gave a short grunt, warning him that now was not the appropriate time for sarcasm. This is Area 44, huh? How come we've never been to this place before? Naruto wondered aloud, walking beside Haku and ahead of their silent red-headed friend. It's off limits to Genin, Haku answered the obvious, it is now clear why. The three of them had finished the first part of the exam and moved along to the site of the second stage as Anko had earlier instructed. Naruto was still a glowing light bulb of self-confidence after passing the first test with such ease, albeit it had greatly frayed the nerves at first. The blonde bounced along with his arms folded behind his head, not in the least bit fearful. Haku, as usual, was the most apprehensive of his team. He supposed this was the part when the real danger started, when Ninja began to vie for the chance of being promoted to Chunin rank. Like Naruto, he too was confident of his team's strength, but dared not underestimate the shady characters that had arrived from other villages. Gaara had decided early on to not form any sort of strategy without first being informed of the second stage's regulations, and didn't let himself get anxious over it. They were not the first group to arrive. Other Genin teams were already pacing the open lawn in front of the fenced-in training area, eagerly awaiting the exam to continue. Deciding to keep a space cushion between themselves and their rival shinobi, Team 2 settled next to a maple tree, all the while watching the other teams circling about. The tension was suffocating. What do you suppose we'll be doing next? Racing through that jungle maybe? Naruto asked finally, unable to leash his ever-mounting curiosity. It's likely, Gaara replied, folding his arms across his sea. Haku frowned, it seems like all the Genin will have to go in there and that means, there will be confrontation. We can handle it. Those other ninja don't look so tough. Naruto yawned, still undeterred. Other Genin arrived in the passing time. Many teams were from grass, sound and rain. There were also the familiar faces of the other Leaf rookies who had passed. Off in the distance, the blonde-haired boy caught sight of Sakura as she walked beside her teammates. Akamaru was nestled comfortably in her arms. He waved to her but she did not see him. Time's up. I will now announce the rules of the second stage of the Chunin exam, so listen good maggots. Anko's voice reverberated through the air once she had appeared near the front gate of Area 44. All of the present Genin crowded around to hear the announcement, each team huddled close together. Naruto, as expected, led his team straight to the front, not wanting to miss anything. The area behind me is known as Training Area 44, and better known as the Forest of Death, Anko began, with no trace of sympathy in her eyes. The goal of the exam's second stage is simple: navigate through the forest and reach the tower at its center. Many Genin relaxed at the news, that was, until she had continued. You will have 5 days to do this. The tower is located 10 kilometers from every entrance gate. In addition, each Genin team will be given 1 scroll before entering. Upon reaching the tower, every team must have both an Earth and Heaven scroll. You acquire scrolls that you have not been given by defeating your companion. If you haven't already guessed, she smirked maniacally, this will reduce the number of ninja who will proceed into the next stage of the exam. Haku sighed to himself, drawing an annoyed look from Gaara. Keep in mind that there are many more dangers than just ninja in the forest. There are also many edible plants and such like in Area 44 to hold you over for the next few days, so keep a sharp eye. One last thing. She paused and her glare seemed to even out over the crowd. You may not under any circumstances open your scrolls until you have entered the tower. Anyone who does so before that time, well, the consequences will come swiftly. What the heck is that supposed to mean, Anko-sensei? Naruto didn't fully understand. If you give us those scrolls then I think we should be allowed to look at them. Anko hurled a brace of kunai at him for his interruption. Naruto caught the first knife and dodged the second, grinning. After his mission to the land of waves with her, he could more easily anticipate her random attacks. That was what he thought until she was behind him a moment later, and Naruto found his fuzzy yellow head in an inescapable headlock. He scowled, accepting the fact that she was a Junin. Well, you can it, you loudmouth. Rules are rules, and if you don't follow them in this exam, then you'll ruin your chances of becoming a Chunin, she paused thoughtfully, or your chances for survival, rather. Okay, Anko-sensei. I get it. Naruto grumbled through his flailing and she promptly released him. Now that that's out of the way, my advice to you all is, just don't s. Anko concluded with a cheery smile, registration is over that way. Sign your name away so that we won't be held responsible if things go unfortunately for any of you. Turn in your consent forms for a scroll and then proceed to your assigned gates. Good luck, maggots. She trotted off, leaving the confident Genin to move on to register. Naruto followed after his teammates as they moved on, rubbing his end tenderly where he had been grappled. Geez, she's just as crazy as ever. Haku chuckled at him, hoping that some humor would lighten the mood, but it didn't really. It was inevitable at this point that they would be facing other shinobi in the forest. It was not clear yet who they would encounter and if they could procure the scroll they needed. After receiving their forms, reading over them, although Naruto skimmed through his hurriedly, and signing the names away into presumed oblivion, Team 2 was given a heaven scroll. For safekeeping, it was given to Gaara to hold, who was the least likely to lose it. Naruto's excited chatter was the only thing that seemed to ease the 10 edgy minutes that followed as they lined up in front of Gate 19, waiting for their chance to burst through the fence and make the mad dash to the tower deep inside the Forest of Death. I feel it would be wise to travel at a steady pace today and tonight, Haku suggested, the cogs in his brilliant mind turning once again. If we cover a lot of ground in the first 48 hours, we can ambush another team as they approach later. Once we obtain an Earth Scroll, we should be able to take some time to rest before reaching the tower. Naruto frowned, still processing the dark-haired boy's plan. You want to travel during the night, Haku-kun? Can't we get just a bit of sleep? We can rest after we secure the second scroll. Gaara sided with Haku. The sooner we get an Earth Scroll, the better our chances of succeeding will be. Ah, yeah. A resounding siren pierced the tense morning air and each gate opened with a sudden jolt. The blonde boy's eyes widened to the size of saucers for a split second, before a grin spread over his face. Let's go. Without even glancing at his teammates to check if they were prepared, Naruto raced in, determined to succeed as they had in the first portion of the exam. Neji immediately took to the treetops, his dark hair flapping wildly behind him as he and his teammates ascended. They moved predatorily, ready to take a scroll from the first unwary team to cross their path. As usual, Lee was the most cordial at the moment, despite their objectives. Team 13 had begun to take the net of safety that the Byakugan provided for granted, because there was never a moment on any mission in which Neji could not be fully trusted to scope out their surroundings. The Hyuga prodigy took up the lead, sweeping his all-seeing eyes through the dense wood, searching for any signs of other ninja. Once again, he didn't seem apprehensive at all. He approached the goal of the exam as if it were his mission. He treats everything like a mission. Tenten thought with her gaze glued to the back of his head. Lee was on her right flank, moving slightly faster. His round, piercing eyes were focused on the bramble ahead. She smirked, knowing how much the exam meant to her teammates. It had never been one of the major milestones in her shinobi life. She had known she would eventually advance when she was ready to advance. If I move up to Chunin rank, I'll be one step closer to becoming a legendary ninja like Tsunade-sama. That was her basic reasoning, so she had fervently agreed to participate when Guy-sensei had questioned him about the exam months earlier. Tenten was startled when Lee dropped out of her peripheral, and for a moment she believed that they had come under attack, but that's impossible. Neji would have. Her surprise turned into relieved exasperation as she saw that Lee had only lost his footing, and tripped over an oddly angled branch. He fell for a number of feet, before catching hold of a lower branch and agilely swung himself upward, again level with Tenten in the canopy. He laughed at himself and she sighed, wondering what triggered his clumsiness. He better watch his step. They kept moving, increasing their speed to catch up with Neji, who hadn't slowed very much for them. Neji. Tenten's mind was a jumbled mess these days, but the one constant had always been Neji. It was difficult to say exactly how it had started, but for the past year of training with Guy-sensei she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. It hadn't been as early as their days at the academy, that much was for certain. Unlike other Kanoiki from her class that year, Tenten disliked gossip and raving about cute boys. She most often was seated at the back of the room next to Lee, coincidentally, displaying the new knives she had forged with the utmost pride. Look. Look. This edge is nearly 36 microns. It can see though human bone in one stroke. Her tomboyish habits did tend to frighten her teachers a little, but many of the boys in her class thought she was an engaging rarity among female ninja. Many, meaning, excluding Neji, who sat by himself. Sometimes he spared a moment to glance over at her new, pointy creations. Once Tenten was placed on Team 13, she had known she would be the Hyuga prodigy's sparring partner. She had nearly insisted on it so that she wouldn't have to watch Lee be thrown down time and time again. Training with Neji was difficult, frustrating, and more often than not, left her exhausted and completely bent on improving herself. There were times she nearly forgot she had a life beyond training with him. Everything about him seemed so calculated and perfect that it was hard for her to believe that she could actually put up a decent fight, until she ran out of weapons. In turn, it spawned a second goal for her, one even direr than her dream of rivaling Tsunade. Tenten wanted to be as strong as Hyuga Neji. It was indeed a very ambitious goal. Her admiration for his skills and ability, with time, seemed to warp and reshape itself into a flickering, fragile affection as she pieced together his fragmented family history and life. Not only did she want to be like him, but she wanted to help change his life and get him back in control of his destiny. There were moments she subconsciously admitted that she would have more luck striving to be like Tsunade. But she always argued that Tsunade was not on her team, not relying on her, and most certainly not struggling with her clan life. So it happened automatically, with her helpless to prevent it. Tenten had unwittingly devoted herself to the aims of the young Hyuga prodigy. Lee, upon private discussion of the subject, and even declaring himself as her best and most trustworthy friend, had told her how sad it was that such a smart, caring person like herself would s her future for someone as detached as Neji. She had yelled at him after that, but secretly knew he was right. Things were just far beyond her emotional control right now. Lately, however, her constantly evolving psyche had suffered through something nearly as painful as the truth of her problem. Team 13's mission to retrieve the scroll of the infallible fire bow, or so was its lore according to Guy Sensei, had opened her eyes to many things. Her first K had been quite gory, much to her distaste. She knew it was an unavoidable event with her being a weapons specialist. She had accepted it with silent yet horrified grace, then acknowledging what her beloved weapons were truly for. Even worse was that upon rejoining Guy Sensei and returning to Konoha, Neji with only a minor concussion, was that Guy Sensei had discovered the body of the Iwa Nin, which Tenten had been too frantic at the time to dispose of. He had spoken to her about it in a surprisingly conciliatory manner, not holding her actions against her. He said he would not tell either Neji or Lee about it, and left the subject's optional discussion with her teammates up to her. Moreover, she had even impressed the Hokage once Guy Sensei had turned in their mission report, and as conciliation for her trouble she had been given custody of the infallible Hayumi. Being that she had handled it with such expertise, it would be a shame to stow away such a magnificent weapon into the archives when she had the full ability to wield it. She accepted it with great humility from the Hokage that day, bade her teammates good night, went directly home and cried herself to sleep, wondering why she was being rewarded for K. Her parents had been viciously K on one of their Anbu Black Ops missions before she had graduated from the academy. It seemed to her that because she was engaging in such an ugly deed she was becoming the very thing she sought to destroy. Then again, being a shinobi was an art of the utmost ambiguity. Tenten wouldn't call herself a hypocrite, but she did feel the guilt whenever she gazed at the scroll of her new Yumi. All ninja will have to K at one point in their careers. I just got an early start. Tenten had decided to not tell her teammates about her S of the Rock Chunin. Most especially not Neji. Neji and Lee had stopped moving. Her thoughts scattered and she halted abruptly, just in time to perch next to the Hyuga, who was staring down at the forest floor with the Byakugan in full intensity. Below there was nothing visible, to her at least. Nothing always meant something. Genjutsu. Tenten suspected, hence Neji's fierce examination of the trap. Before he leapt down, he gave a silent motion for Lee and Tenten to wait, and Neji plummeted down. They watched as he made contact with the muddy earth, raced to the center of a clearing, and with AS of Yukin he unearthed a hidden rain ninja. The shinobi's pained cry was C-short when another S of Yukan connected with his abdomen, immediately rousing the attention of his teammates who had hidden themselves on the opposite side of the clearing. With their trap so unexpectedly sprung, their attack was slow and confused as they abandoned their hiding place to ambush Neji, only to be ambushed themselves. Take this. Leaf Hurricane. Lee was a vibrant green flash as he knocked the two Rain Nin from the air with a round of relentless kicks. Their heads hit the ground first when they fell, and Tenten raised a fine eyebrow to see that it had taken them less than a half hour to get their second scroll. She jumped down next to Lee and watched smugly as Neji took the defeated team's Heaven Scroll. He replaced it in his hip pouch. Lee was jubilant. Yes. Our strategy and teamwork succeeds once again. He raised a hand to high-five Neji and the prodigy only stared at his hand, as if he didn't comprehend. Neji's stare turned to Tenten and she gave him a weak smile, trying to show her approval of his quick thinking. He blinked slowly, something she found inanely adorable and un-Neji-like. Tenten quickly put the pattering feeling in her C in line. He seemed satisfied with her reaction and completely misinterpreted Lee's. We should keep moving, Neji decided, his voice raised over Lee's chatter. We can gain some ground before nightfall. Lee nodded in excited agreement. Tenten's nod was slower and more thoughtful. Somehow she could tell their luck far exceeded that of some other teams presently. Elsewhere in the forest, Team 8 was having trouble locating another genin team to steal from. Hinata had immediately activated her Byakugan once she and her teammates had entered the forest, intending to find the safest path through and at the same time, find an opposing team more quickly. It was not working the way they had anticipated. Team 8 was making good time, but there were no signs of other shinobi, not even after an hour of searching. Unknown to her teammates, something else was troubling Hinata. Her eyes had begun to bother her over the past few weeks, although there was nothing wrong with her Byakugan, much to her relief. It was a dull, persisting ache near the chakra pathways that lead to her eyes. It simply would not end. She had determined that this may be a sign of illness, much to her terror, or worse, her Byakugan was beginning to deteriorate. Hinata had no idea what may have triggered such a reaction, being that she had done nothing to injure herself at all recently. She was terribly fearful of admitting her problem to anyone, most especially her father, who would take it as a sign of weakness if her blood limit was somehow malfunctioning. So no one knew and she raced on through the dark woods with her teammates close behind her. Hinata rubbed absently at her shoulder only to discover a small Kikaichu insect there. She let it be, knowing Shino often planted his little helpers on herself and Sato to keep track of them if they were ever separated. Without turning her head, she looked at Shino, seeing him as focused and calm as ever. The sight helped her relax and ignore her aching eyes. Sato, as far as she could see, was still unwilling to talk to them. This upset her greatly. After she and Shino had agreed to prevent him from ever using the Chidori, Sato had become cold and distant towards them. Even during the first part of the exam when Shino had sent one of his insects to give answers to Sato, it was a bit disturbing for her to see him squash the helpful bug mercilessly after it had presented him with all of the test paper's answers. He had proved his point quite vividly to Shino, who was absolutely enraged after Sato's outburst. Sato never hurt insects, not even accidentally, one thing Shino respected Sato for. Apparently things were changing now. If Sato-kun does not begin to communicate with us soon we may fail this part of the exam. Hinata was fearful of the consequences of her moody teammates' actions. I wish there was something I could do. She decided to stop and halted on a thick tree branch. Shino and Sato did the same. Relieving her eyes of the Byakugan, Hinata sat down and caught her breath, accepting the canteen of water Shino passed to her. Thank you, Shino-kun. If you wanted to have a rest earlier, all you had to do was ask. Shino pointed out and she blushed in embarrassment, hoping her fatigue wasn't that visible. He sat next to her and also had a drink of water. Hinata watched in reserved fascination as the Aberrane boy tipped some water into his palm and let his Kikaichu insects have a drink as well. She found that she no longer feared bugs after spending so much time watching Shino interact with them. Sato, who stood sullenly nearby, turned on his heel and began to descend down to the forest floor. Hinata couldn't help but overreact. Sato-kun. Where are you going? Bathroom. His response was terse. He vanished into the undergrowth a moment later, leaving her slightly troubled. Shino's eyes were invisible behind his dark glasses, but Hinata could tell they were narrowed. Please don't be angry with Sato-kun, she said softly, dropping her gaze. He is very upset. He didn't mean to say that. He had full intentions of doing so after he gained information from it, Shino responded coolly. Regardless of how he feels, he had no place taking the life of a comrade that was merely giving him assistance. He is childish and irrational. I will not sympathize with him. Hinata closed her eyes and whimpered quietly, exhausted from all the animosity between her teammates. There was just no reasoning with them, she had concluded, for they knew all too well how to get on each other's nerves. Sato heartlessly squashes Shino's bugs and Shino berates Sato for his puerile behavior. It was a vicious cycle that even she could not end. And what made matters worse, in her opinion at least, was that they were just actually becoming friends. Shino had lightened up around Sato after the Tanabata festival, if only a little. And Sato was beginning to act more wisely and respectfully. Kudos to Shino. Now it seemed things could never be that good between them again. Oh Naruto-kun, what am I supposed to do? They will barely look at each other, so how can we ever make it through this exam as a team? Hinata was hoping some of his grinning, sunshiny advice would light the way for her, but she could think of nothing. 10 minutes had passed and Hinata was certain that Sato had not gone to the bathroom as he said he had. Shino shared her thoughts. Do you think Sato-kun is all right? She asked, standing up at last. He stood as well. There is always a small chance he may need our assistance. Hinata followed Shino down to the forest floor, her heart hammering in her sea. What were the odds that Sato ran into another shinobi team when they had no luck finding one earlier? Probably very good. They had only gone a few meters before they spotted him, trekking through a nettle of ferns and scratching his itchy cheek. His midnight blue eyes flew open as he saw his teammates rush at him. Kunai out, or crap. They're gonna kill me, aren't they? Sato's arms flew up in front of his face and he cringed when they stopped in front of him, looking equally bewildered. There was a tense moment between them. He wondered why he had suspected his own teammates to attack him. PSH. Like that'd ever happen. What was I thinking? What were you doing? Shino was fed up with him. He tucked his kunai away, seeing they had nothing to fear. What do you care, bug boy? You're the one with the scroll. Sato snorted, very loudly. There was a pause as Hinata exchanged a confused glance with Shino. The Hyuga girl frowned inwardly. I thought I had been given the scroll. Things became clearer as 3 ninja dropped from the dusky treetops and surrounded Shino. Sato and Hinata scattered in response. Sato smirked, glad they had taken the false bait. The cloud ninja each plunged a kunai into the Aberame boy, only to recoil in surprise when it dispersed as a clone made of insects. Humiliated by their mistake, they turned around, hurling kunai at the leaf genin in unison. Shino had reappeared behind Hinata after they deflected the projectiles and Sato, it seemed, had planned this much earlier than they had thought he had. The first cloud ninja to jump forward seemed to hang suspended in the air for a suspiciously long moment, a moment his teammates overlooked as they too lunged in a craze at Team 8, only to get tangled in the trap that the first ninja had been snagged in. Hinata had not seen Sato set a trap so cruel before. With pained cries, the 3 struggling Kumo nin only entangled themselves more thoroughly in the barbed wire Sato had laid over a spike pit in the ground. The wire, though excruciating, was the only thing preventing them from falling into another, more trap. Sato watched with dark eyes as they at the wiring, unable to see it, and only tightening their snares. Hinata turned away, trying to forget how skilled Sato was with traps, especially when he was angry. Shino seemed less bothered, if not approving of Sato's hard work, and took the scroll from the indignant, struggling Kunoiki who was then dripping with B from head to toe. Wait. You can have our scroll. But get us out of this. Her voice was reaching a shockingly high pitch. Come on. Her teammates were howling in agonized agreement, still clueless as to how to escape. Get yourselves out, Sato spat. His glare was tangible. We have what we want and we could have just as easily taken your scroll without you falling into my trap. The Hitaki jammed his hands into his jacket pockets and stalked away, Shino following close behind. Hinata knew they were not setting a very good example by showing no mercy, but she would be unable to free the helpless team without Sato's instruction. He was unwilling to free them. She gave a short apology to them before following after her teammates, trying not to listen to the pained cries of the stranded Cloud Ninja. Hey, can we stop for a minute? Naruto asked, stopping in his tracks. Ahead of him, Gaara and Haku also stopped, each of them offering the blonde a questioning look. Naruto-kun, I thought we'd agreed to travel for the first 48 hours without stopping. Haku recalled, he himself not trying to show any fatigue. Yeah, I know, Naruto answered, a small frown on his face, I have to pee. Then hurry, Gaara folded his arms and sighed, expecting something as trivial from Naruto, we can't afford delays. Wait, Haku didn't let him leave right away, to prevent any ambushes we'll all speak a common password. A password. Naruto didn't understand his reasoning. Yes, when you come back we'll ask. Haku quickly thought up a question only Naruto could answer, what is the name of the village we first met in, alright. Whatever you say, Haku-kun. The blonde gave him a sheepish grin before turning to search the undergrowth for a good spot to relieve himself. Glad for a moment of rest, Haku leaned against the nearest tree, wondering how Gaara kept up so well with Naruto even with the extra weight of his gourd. It is merely a testament to how much stronger he has become, Haku thought, taking a deep breath. Neither he or Naruto seemed to be tired yet. When did I become such a burden? Again, he was left to ponder how he had begun to lag behind the progress of his teammates. Taking Jiraiya and Gaara's advice before the start of the exam a week earlier, Haku had gone to train with Lee's team in hopes of improving his taijutsu. Neji seemed a bit too preoccupied training with Tenten to offer him any training that didn't involve getting all of his tenketsu sealed. Lee and Guy, on the other hand, had taught him some basics in the short time they could. He was still sore from their rigorous training, Haku was surprised to admit. He had a low tolerance for pain and very little muscle mass, so Guy didn't hesitate to tell him he was appalled of how frail, young Haku-kun was, and then proceeded to toughen him up by having Lee spar with him. Haku was glad when it was over. Lee, as a sparring partner, put both Gaara and Naruto to shame. And although Haku did improve drastically from his previous skill level, he couldn't quite compare his physical strength to either that of his teammates. The dark-haired boy sighed aloud, drawing a curious look from his red-haired friend. Gaara could tell without even having to ask that Haku was under a lot of stress. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing either. He knew that Haku tended to work better under pressure. After a minute Naruto had returned, wearing a goofy look of relief. Ah. That's better. Gaara snorted and Haku frowned at him, not understanding his pithy behavior. Password. Haku asked it on reflex and was surprised by Naruto's answer. HN. Konoha. In the next instant, the imposter found himself trapped in a coffin of sand, which then hurled him through the air and him full force into a tree. The pop of his dislocating jaw was audible as his head hit, and Haku shook his head as the henge fell and revealed an injured and cross-eyed grass ninja. He fell to the ground unconscious and Gaara, with no guilt of any kind, searched him for a scroll. Haku was even further astonished when Gaara found one. When he was listening and he should have been more cautious, the dark-haired boy pointed out as Gaara handed him the earth scroll that the grass nin had with him. What luck. Naruto arrived a moment later, looking flustered. Some guy jumped me when I was going. Then he ran off when he found out I didn't have the scroll. He frowned at the knocked-out ninja at the base of a nearby tree. Oh, never mind, you got him. His teammates could only chuckle in amusement, not expecting it to be so easy. The sun began to lower in the sky and the last trickling beams of light filtered through the canopy of the dense forest. Team 2 had decided to scrap their plan after Haku began showing signs of slowing and they found a place to rest beside a small stream. We've got a heaven and an earth scroll now, and it's only day 1. Naruto was thrilled with the good fortune. We'll have no problem with this exam, for sure. We can't start getting overconfident now, Naruto-kun. We still have to reach the tower in 4 days, Haku pointed out. Some food would be nice too. Then we go fishing, Naruto resolved, referring to the bubbling stream behind them. Come on. The sooner we eat the better. The blonde moved to the water's edge, trying to catch sight of any prey. Eventually he was assisted in his endeavor by an equally hungry Gaara. Haku also decided to help a few minutes later, catching the most fish due to his Kekkei Genkai. He merely levitated the sections of water that the fish generally swam in and let his teammates pick him off. A short while later, the three boys sat contentedly around a fire, finished eating. I still like ramen better, Naruto decided, stretching, but now I think that fish isn't that bad. Gaara smothered the flames of the cooking fire with sand, not wanting to create smoke that could attract other ninja. Haku sat next to him, feeling better with a full stomach. We should collect rations for the next few days while we can, Haku suggested, trying to form a new plan, that way we can stop less for food. That's a good idea, Haku-kun, Naruto agreed after a lazy burp, then dropped to his back. I'm gonna take a nap now. Rather than sitting idly, Gaara stood and collected the canteens each of his teammates had with them. I'm getting water. You should go now if you want to find more things we can eat. Haku nodded and then departed to search for other edible wildlife. Naruto, predictably, hadn't moved an inch. He was too full from all the food he ate. If their luck persisted, he could probably sleep it off with sweet dreams of ramen. Haku, being the most familiar with plant life, was the wisest choice to be sent looking for food. There weren't that many things to find, he was troubled to see. There were nearly as many dangerous plants as there were safe. Even after 10 minutes of picking his way through the undergrowth, he had only gathered a small number of mushrooms and a few leafy plants. They weren't very nourishing but would provide some stamina, if he had read correctly. Things that they didn't really need he also came across. Herbs that were good for burns and he found growing beneath a boulder, and a few budding flowers also had some properties that could help an upset stomach. I may have to save this for Naruto-kun later. Haku looked ahead in the patch of holly fern he had been picking through, and saw a ninja standing out in the open. A quick glance at the nin's forehead protector notified him it was another grass nin. This one was also alone. It's possible this shinobi is the teammate of the one that Gaara knocked out, possibly trying to retrieve their lost scroll. Haku's thoughts were sent reeling off into nonsensical babble as he was stuck with a blast of intent that left him utterly paralyzed. He dropped everything that he had gathered for his teammates, and found he was unable to draw his horrified, dark eyes away from the stare of the grass nin. The stranger stood perfectly still in the same field of ferns. I can't move. You're a pretty one, aren't you? The ninja's voice was amused and oddly outgoing. Is it wise to be out here all by yourself? I need to get to Naruto-kun and Gaara-kun. Run. I won't stop you. Run away right now back to your little teammates. The grass nin smirked. Can't you run, pretty little boy? What's the matter? This intent. It's so powerful that I just can't. I see. You will not run then. That's alright. The grass ninja drew out a kunai. I suppose you want to make this easy for me. I should thank you. Haku's shuddering hand managed to close around a few senbon, but when he raised his arm back up, he was unable to throw them. I can't fight. Not like this. Are you sure you don't want to run before I KO you? Pretty little boy. Move. I understand. The grass nin's smirk broadened. You've given up. Move. Goodbye, leaf ninja. You've made this very easy. The grass nin launched his kunai. Move. Haku's shuddering hand jerked, sinking a needle into his right arm. The pain was enough of a distraction to rid him of his paralysis, and Haku dodged less than a moment before the kunai landed in the spot he had occupied before. The dark-haired boy made a leap for the treetops, wanting to gain the high ground. The grass shinobi did not follow immediately. I'm too far off to rejoin Naruto-kun and Gaara-kun. I have to get him to come to me. Haku searched around through his holster and retrieved a kunai with an exploding tag attached. Naruto had given it to him the day before, saying it may come in handy even if he didn't like knives. With as much strength as he could muster, he hurled the kunai skyward, reaching above the treetops by only a meter or two, and with a flicker of chakra he detonated it. The explosion was not as visible as it was loud, and Haku wondered why Naruto felt the need to possess such powerful explosives. I'm over here, little boy. The grass nin was resettled on a nearby tree branch. If you want to fight, I don't mind. Haku subconsciously reached for more senbon before the grass ninja leapt. Much to Haku's dismay, the shinobi utilized taijutsu. He came at Haku with a volley of punches followed up by a powerful kick which he was just barely able to avoid. The dark-haired boy aimed for critical points on his foe's body, and was glad to see that after throwing nearly 24 senbon, more than half had hit since they had been in close quarters. The Kusa nin had slowed considerably, and was visibly in pain from Haku's senbon strikes. Shinjutsu. I see. It is not a common practice. The grass nin watched Haku with calculating eyes, but it will not be enough to stop me, little boy. Before the ninja could make another move, sand rose in a grainy cloud, swarming the branch and forcing the grass nin to relocate. He frowned at the newcomers. Naruto and Gaara landed on either side of Haku, both startled. We heard the tag go off, Naruto explained, giving Haku a quizzical look. What the heck's going on here? A grass ninja, but he's strong. The dark-haired boy rubbed the B spot on his arm. Be careful. The K intent he gives off is like nothing I've ever felt before. There is only one of him. Gaara was ready to fight. We will end this quickly. More sand leaked from his gourd and proceeded to swarm through the branches, driving the Kusa shinobi further and further back. I did not think we would meet so soon, the grass nin purred, eyeing Gaara. You remind me of my plans. To Naruto and as well as Haku's horror, the grass nin used a summoning jutsu. At first, they could not see the creature he called until it reared its huge, ugly head from below, attempting to seize Gaara. The red-haired boy leapt back, surprised, sand everywhere. So he summons a snake. Big deal. I've got something way better. Naruto grinned broadly before biting his thumb and rushing through a number of seals. Haku leapt up to a higher branch, watching as the smoke cleared, and beside Naruto were 3 enormous red toads. Each had a sword slung on its back. The blonde hopped readily on the head of the center toad, which gave a confident croak. You mess with Haku-kun, you mess with me. Naruto barked, his battle toads itching to fight. The grass nin was impressed. Interesting. One as young as you can already summon such powerful toads. It will be all the more sweet when I crush you. The giant snake refused to end its pursuit of Gaara, who simply did not have enough sand to crush something so monstrously large. He was on the ground, fending off the creature's head with blasts of sand. Let's go. Naruto and his amphibious comrades rushed straight at the grass ninja who was still not intimidated. Haku, from higher up, hurled rounds of senbon with the intention of slowing their opponent down even more. The grass shinobi quickly summoned a second snake, slightly larger than the last, which immediately clamped down onto one of the toads with powerful fangs. In response it the snake's end with its sword, trying to free itself. A moment later, the trapped toad was bitten in half. Naruto's remaining toads lunged forward, livid, skewering the serpent through its open mouth. It reared back in agony before crashing down to the forest floor. Haku and Naruto continued on, not letting the grass nin out of their sight. I guess it's now or never. Naruto was closing in on the grass nin, who had summoned a third snake to eliminate the last of his toads. A blue, spiraling sphere of chakra formed in his right hand as he raced along a branch towards the enemy with no intentions of slowing. Haku stopped throwing senbon at the Kusa shinobi. Naruto had gotten too close and he didn't want to hit him by mistake. He watched his blonde teammate continue forward, and couldn't recognize the blue sphere he saw Naruto begin to form. Take this, Rasengan. Naruto leapt at the cornered ninja who was backed against the trunk of a tree. To his disgust, the ninja's tongue reached out a number of yards, snake-like, and wrapped itself around his middle, stopping Naruto just short of his target. The Rasengan missed, but nicked the grass nin's cheek. Oh, that is very impressive. The grass nin was delighted. You're not half bad. Naruto was held at a distance as he tried to wriggle free of the grass nin's grip. Gah. Let me down, you sick bastard. This thing is a tongue. Ugh. Senbon rained down, striking the enemy ninja in the face. He recoiled and dropped Naruto. The angered grass nin turned his gaze to Haku, who stood on a high branch of an ancient oak. Senbon was steadied between his knuckles. Don't think I've forgotten you, pretty little boy. The new snake finished the last 2 of Naruto's toads and proceeded to attack him. The blonde leapt up, higher into the canopy, beginning to draw on the Kyuubi's chakra. Come on, you old fox. I need some help here. Naruto felt his chakra reserves instantly replenish and he grinned, knowing what forces were at work. He twisted around, catching a glimpse of Haku who was still tailing the grass ninja. The blonde formed a second Rasengan and this time he did not miss. He the sphere into the hideous, scaled face of the oncoming snake, knocking it back as it toppled over a number of huge trees. Haku had never seen Naruto display such a powerful technique before and could only assume Jiraiya had something to do with it. Down below, Gaara had been cornered in his own sand shield, trapped in the coils of the snake. Feeling triumphant over the small ninja, the serpent opened its lethal jaws wide and swallowed him and his sand shield whole. The snake relaxed afterwards, preparing to process its meal. A moment later, the snake was blown apart from the inside out with spikes of sand. Gaara landed, flustered and covered in digestive fluids, with his sand circling around him in weight. He wore a disgusted expression as he began wipe saliva off of his arms. Before Naruto could meet up with Haku higher in the canopy, the grass nin's wicked tongue had caught him by surprise again, reaching to an even longer length. You've caused a bit too much trouble, boy. The grass nin glared at the struggling, Kyuubi-powered ninja. I've grown tired of you. Haku had thrown his senbon a moment too late. Five-pronged seal. The grass ninja jabbed at Naruto's stomach, placing an odd-numbered seal over the seal of the demon fox. A moment later the boy went limp and was tossed aside carelessly, hitting a few branches on his way down to the forest floor. Naruto. Haku leapt downward, not understanding what had happened to his teammate. He was intercepted by the Kusa nin. He narrowed his eyes while the grass nin extracted a needle from his cheek casually, smirking at Haku. It's better if that little brat stays out of our way. What did you do to him? Haku leapt at the rogue ninja in a rage, throwing the last of his senbon. The grass shinobi had another kunai out and blocked the final round of needles with little effort. Haku landed behind his opponent on a higher branch, trying to find another means of attack. Don't worry about your little friend, the Kusa nin grinned up at Haku, you shall soon share his fate. Haku formed hand seals, no longer stalling, demonic crystal ice mirrors. It wasn't as difficult as he expected it to be, using the water in the air to create sheets of ice. The dome of mirrors encompassed the branch the grass nin was standing on, trapping him. Haku failed to note that he had created many more mirrors than he had ever been able to form before, once he had dove headfirst into the mirror nearest to him. He was too busy trying to think up a strategy. I can only use ice from here on out. I have to make this quick. Where was Gaara? Haku certainly hoped he would arrive soon. He didn't have much chakra left in him. The grass ninja stood, perplexed, having never witnessed mirrors used in battle before. He smiled and watched, waiting for Haku to strike first. Haku formed half of a seal he normally would to form to manipulate water, something he had experimented with on his mission to the land of waves, 1,000 flying water needles of death. Ice from his mirrors contributed in the attack, sending thousands of shards of needle-like projectiles at the enemy, who made no move to dodge. How creative. The grass nin liked to hear himself talk, even in the midst of an assault. You are not a shinobi originally from Konoha, are you? Haku's target had disappeared, only a moment before his needles had struck. What? He moved so quickly I couldn't even see him. Where did he go? He had no time to react when in the reflection of an adjacent mirror, the Kusa ninja had returned, wielding a strange sword. Haku shuddered, knowing there was no time to escape. What can I? The shinobi's sword hacked through the ice mirrors, though it seemed the grass ninja was making a tremendous effort to do so. Haku watched as the fragments shimmered in the burning afternoon light, and as the sword came crashing towards his current mirror. I can't stay here. He fled, letting the last of his ice sheets be destroyed, and he tumbled down a few levels through the thick of the canopy. He hit hard on his back, unable to breathe and out of chakra. Haku had never been in more desperate need of his teammates. I can't do this without them. I need Naruto and Gaara. This ninja is going to. Had enough. The dark-haired boy struggled to sit up, choking on the air rushing into his lungs. His enemy, still fighting fit, stood pleasantly on the same branch a few meters away. The sword he had with him was gone, but Haku could see slight evidence of the wounds he and Naruto had inflicted on him. Gaara-kun, you have too. Very good. You're perfect. A truly rare find. The Kusa nin was rambling again, and Haku could not find the strength to stand. You certainly have made my visit here much more fun. What are you talking about? Haku watched in bewilderment as his foe's end had stretched to an inhuman length, reaching far enough to be inches away from him. Grinning sinisterly, the bizarre ninja revealed a pair of fangs and sunk them down into the right side of Haku's en. The shock barely registered on his face as the dark-haired boy tried to jerk away, but simply had no energy to do so. Searing pain shot through him like fire, blurring his vision, and he was surprised there was enough air in his lungs for him to cry out like he had. Fangs dripping, the Kusa nin drew away to observe his achievement, licking his lips. And it's still so early in the day. Shuddering, Haku looked on with eyes wide in confusion as the ninja proceeded to peel his face away, revealing a grayer, more menacing face beneath. He felt his stomach turn over and he hoped that there was a chance for his death to come quickly. I feel we have not been properly introduced. Haku, was it? The ninja's smirk only defined his snake-like features. My name is Orochimaru, and we will meet again. The bite mark on Haku's end began to darken and in a short moment 3 black marks appeared. He had not seen the seal form but he had felt it. Haku could barely see as Orochimaru departed, no longer interested, very pleased with his tea of the young leaf genin. Panting, Haku put pressure on the marks at the nape of his en, unable to subdue the increasing pain. He hadn't the faintest idea who Orochimaru was or what he had wanted, but the next meeting would be too soon. Gaara hadn't removed much of the snake's bodily fluids from his clothing before a blonde blur came hurtling down through a storm of leaves. He could tell immediately Naruto was unconscious and took it as a very bad sign. Naruto was not the kind of person to allow himself to be defeated. With a strained leap, Gaara caught the latter by his jacket as he fell. His jump was ungraceful and they fell in a heap. He landed on an upraised tree root with a crack which Gaara assumed was the sound of the vertebrae in his en realigning. After a long, dizzying moment, the red-haired boy rose slowly to his knees, rolling the blonde onto his back with a short tug. Naruto. He spoke his teammate's name automatically in a weak effort to revive him. Naruto lay silently, unmoving. He did not respond in any fashion. Not even a snore. His breathing was shallow, but there appeared to be no wounds on him from what Gaara could decipher. Before he could further examine the QB container's state, a chilling wail shook through the canopy above him, scattering birds more quickly than when the exploding tag had gone off earlier. Haku. It was Haku's cry and Gaara was moving fast, trusting that Naruto wasn't going anywhere. Haku was not well. He was aware of it long before he discovered his other teammate hunched over on the limb of an old oak, screaming so loud Gaara believed it would attract the attention of all the genin in the forest. He landed behind the dark-haired boy, placing a steadying hand on his shuddering shoulder. At the touch, Haku fell quiet and motionless, as if Gaara had turned him into some sort of statue. It had a similar effect. Haku swooned and fell back into Gaara's arms, knocking him over. There was bee on Haku's en and Gaara hastily wiped it away, trying to discern the area where he had been injured. It was difficult to tell. Haku, sit up. Haku was completely out. His full weight was pressed on the redhead, who wriggled out from beneath him in aggravation and tried to right the boy with little success. Gaara gave up on speaking to his dark-haired teammate. There was no wound, which frustrated him even more. How had the grass ninja, whose whereabouts were currently unknown to him, rendered both Haku and Naruto incapacitated without even injuring them? It was then, upon dragging the limp form of his second teammate upward, that Gaara did notice a peculiar blot on Haku's en. He made note of it but was truthfully grateful that no one on his team had been critically wounded. Was this the price they paid for obtaining both of their scrolls so quickly? Giant serpents. K-intent. Utter mayhem. Gaara muttered something unintelligible, yet clearly infuriated as he returned to Naruto's resting place with Haku draped over his shoulder. It was a moment when Gaara would have appreciated the absence of his gourd, despite the protection it offered. Haku was not heavy, but he was precariously tall. I need more arms, was his first thought as he grabbed Naruto, as gently as possible, by the scruff of his fluorescent orange jacket. When had he suddenly become the pack mule for wounded ninja? It was humiliating for someone of his talent and he was unsure of what to do after managing to tug along his unconscious teammates. I need to find a place where they can recover with no further interruption. Gaara thought, his head throbbing, trying not to become frantic. By his very nature he was calm and collected, but neither Haku or Naruto were showing any signs of good health, wounded or not. It was that fact that had him moving surprisingly quick down on the gloomy forest floor, while carrying the full weight of his companions. The next time he saw that grass ninja, Gaara would make certain that his face was the last thing the fool would ever see. He picked the wrong one to leave conscious. Anko sat atop the registration tent while munching on her favorite snack. She hummed to herself pleasantly, savoring the sweat flavor of the bean paste as she devoured skewer after skewer of dango. Once she had finished the last bite of her lunch, Anko tossed the skewer to her right, where it joined countless other sticks that impaled the side of a cedar tree. She approved of the shape she had created with them, there. A perfect leaf village symbol. Anko-san. A voice came from down below, and she glanced down to the 3 chunin waiting below the registration tent. What? I'm on my lunch break, you know. Anko responded sourly, being that she would have much preferred to enjoy another snack before going back to tending the second stage of the exam. Do excuse us, a second of the ninja spoke up, more urgently, but there is something we believe you should see. The alarmed look on the chunin's face sold her and she hopped down, her long coat flapping behind her. Let's see it then, if it's that bad. Anko followed him a short ways off to a memorial in silence, curious about what was troubling them. Once there, they gestured to the 3B at the foot of the stone, laying askew and overlapping each other. She walked over to get a closer look as one of the chunin filled in a few details. These 3 are grass ninja. It looks like they were K after they had registered. Watch out though, it's pretty nasty. Anko flinched away after seeing what had been so revolting about the genin's death. Their faces are completely gone. A young chunin with a scarred face spoke up. Yeah, it's really bad. We're not sure how it was done. There doesn't seem to be any motive for their M either and no signs of struggle. It looks like an ambush. The last time I saw something like this was. Anko's eyes were wide when the truth dawned on her. Horrifyingly, there's no mistaking it. This is his work all right, but what is he doing here of all places? And why now? Go notify Hokage-sama of this immediately, Anko barked, startling her subordinates. Go now. I have to get to Area 44. The chunin gave her a questioning look before submitting and taking off together to the Hokage's tower, uncertain about her cause for panic. Anko quickly abandoned the M scene, rushing in terror back to the Forest of Death. What are you doing here, Orochimaru? What can you gain from this exam? Thus began her agonizing search through Area 44 for the one she once called her mentor. Gaara sat quietly between Haku and Naruto. They were both unconscious. It had been a long while since he had ever been so stressed. Gaara couldn't recall a time when circumstances had been so bad. He had found shelter in a small alcove which, at the time of its discovery, had been inhabited by a truck-sized millipede. He promptly squashed it with his sand and claimed its home for himself. After laying his teammates down, he holed up the entrance of the cave with a wall of sand, not wanting any unwelcome visitors to drop by. It was then he realized the magnitude of his conundrum. They would not be able to proceed through the forest unless fully awake, and the time until which both Haku and Naruto achieved that state could range from hours to possibly days, for all Gaara knew. The only option that was left for Gaara, in the meantime, was to wait. He hated waiting. With his stolen time, he resolved to be thankful for how fortunate they had been during their haphazard battle with the lone Kusa-nin. They hadn't lost any scrolls and no one had been injured. It was really quite miraculous. Even so, Naruto had still given no indication of waking and neither had Haku. It was then, brushing his hand against the dark-haired boy's pale arm, did Gaara discover something deeply alarming. Haku was blistering with fever. This was indeed very puzzling to him. Gaara was certain that Haku had not been in any way ill upon entering the Forest of Death. He could only assume that he had contracted it after fighting the strange grass ninja, although how was still a mystery. He was forced to cope even though he didn't nearly have as much experience as Haku when it came to giving someone medical attention. Gaara rummaged around through the few supplies his team had with them. Finding that Naruto's items would be of the most use, he took all of them. At least they had some water, thanks to him, tipping some from Haku's canteen and wetting a cloth. He removed his teammate's forehead protector and replaced the damp cloth there instead, hoping it would help. Finding nothing else to do, Gaara ventured outside, set a trap, and then returned, anxious and irritated. If this exam had any parallels to the true toils in a chunin's life, his suggestion would be to teach more medical techniques to genin while in the academy, because a kunai would not bring a fever down, unfortunately. Gaara sat beside them watching. Waiting. He hated waiting. They were so still there were times he leaned over just to make sure they were breathing. An hour passed, as did a second, and over the course of that agonizing time, Gaara had frequently made Naruto and Haku sit up and take a drink of water. It was when he depleted their water sources Gaara discovered something even worse. Haku had stopped sweating. Though Naruto had no such problem, the red-haired boy was aware that it was a sign of dehydration, a common symptom of someone running a fever. Haku. Dehydrated. Gaara didn't think something like that was possible, but apparently he had been wrong. Therefore that made the top priority to fetch more water, and prevent any more hardships for his team. He took all of their canteens and left, bringing his gourd with him. After exiting the hideout, Gaara resealed the entrance with a wall of sand as he had before, knowing it would be more than enough protection for them. Fortunately, the stream he and the rest of his team had stumbled upon earlier that day branched off in two directions. The eastbound brook, as he could see, ran very close by. Gaara knelt down by the trickling rivulet, filling their containers while wearing a frown that threatened the longevity of his face. Never before had he been forced to keep such a thorough guard of Naruto and Haku. It was unsettling for him to admit just how nervous he had been after the bout with the grass ninja, hoping that their lives had been spared. It was unclear what the goal of the enemy ninja had been because Gaara had not witnessed the fight. He finished filling the canteens and set them aside, cupping his hand and splashed his face with the icy water. Gaara blinked, feeling a bit more alert. That was about the time he heard a commotion nearby and he scowled. Other ninja, his mind supplied, and he didn't recognize any of the rowdy shouts to be of Leaf Genin. Gaara felt ninja affairs should involve communications of less volume. Of course, the thought also crossed his mind that another squad of ninja, and a healthy, loud one to boot, could pose as a major threat for his severely weakened team. Gaara decided to investigate the raucous. He left the canteens by the water's edge, intending to return for them in but a few short moments. Gaara was nearly as talented as Haku when it came to stealth. Naruto, he noted, also had talent, but lacked the capacity to keep his mouth shut sometimes. As usual, he was the intermediary of his team, or so Jiraiya had called him. Gaara had disagreed, saying that there was much more to a balanced team than at least one possessing mid-range talents. The red-haired boy approached by ground, his keen eyes piercing ahead into a scrub-filled clearing, where, by the look of it, a trap had been set off and evaded. He was slightly baffled to see that only one ninja was making all the racket, some short, mouse-haired ninja garbed in buckles and layer after layer of leather. Gaara snorted to himself, he'd seen this type before. Antagonist. It was foolish for the ninja to provoke another team so openly, but since he was here, Gaara thought a bit of eavesdropping wouldn't hurt. And they said Cloud Shinobi were dangerous. PFT. You're just a bunch of stuck-up pricks. What are you so afraid of? Scared you'll lose your scroll to us? The mousy antagonist was grinning a yellow-toothed smile, and Gaara frowned, not understanding his aim. The trio of Kumo ninjas stood close in formation. However, it was a shock to see that they weren't wise enough to ignore the loudmouth's bait, or simply wanted to indulge him. The tallest of the Cloud spoke, his eyes narrowed. Our merit is well deserved. It would be best for you not to make any more foolish choices in this forest. His teammates stood close, both boys less inclined to speak, but equally annoyed. See it out, Miyosuke. A groan of impatience sounded from behind the short troublemaker. We already have both of our scrolls. Save the attitude for later fights, will you? Miyosuke gave an irritated look to his teammate who came up from behind him, carrying a bandaged puppet on his back. Kankuro's right, a blonde-haired girl came to stand beside him, one hand rested on her hip. No need to further dishonor Suna with your antics. Stuff it, Temari. The mousy ninja yanked on the strap of a huge boomerang slung on his back in agitation. They came after us, remember. Gaara froze. The Cloud Ninja watched, agitated, as Miyosuke tried to justify his thirst for a fight to his teammates. They were in no hurry. Gaara's brain scrambled, trying to compute the reality of the situation. Surely the mousy boy hadn't been speaking to his Kankuro and Temari. His brother and sister. Odd how possessive a moment it was for him, how Gaara couldn't understand the long-lost and yet recently reawakened yearning to be near his siblings. He had never counted on them being in this year's Chunin exam. Gaara, as a matter of fact, hadn't believed them to even be alive at this point in time, and had they been, he pictured them to be Chunin by now. Yet there they stood, plain as the day was long. My brother and sister. Instantly he hated Miyosuke, the mousy antagonist, the loudmouth, his replacement. That could have been me standing there. Haku and Naruto were going to have to wait. Let's go, this is getting ridiculous. Temari turned her nose up at the Cloud Ninja. Clearly she was as impatient as her brother. We're wasting time, you dolts. Miyosuke turned from her, not even considering her advice. Tell me something, Miyosuke smirked at the tall ninja. Does it ever bother you that the symbol on your forehead protector looks like a pile of S? That did it. Kankuro and Temari scowled, fed up with their teammate. The Cloud Nin were also fed up with him. The two quiet members of the Kumo team charged, their mouths both drawn into a feral snarl. Kunai were whipped out, thrown with such speed and force that there was no way Miyosuke could dodge. Gaara was still in too much of a shock to see that the fighting had started, much to his siblings' disdain. The squat antagonist gripped the tie of his enormous boomerang, flashing his teeth, glad he finally had gotten a rise out of them. Futon, Jetstream S. The huge weapon was hurled forward with surprising strength, and the red and ivory arc screamed past the unprepared Cloud Shinobi, knocking both them and their kunai back to the complete other side of the clearing. The boomerang rebounded, S-tree branches in its path, and returned obediently back to its master's waiting hand. You idiot! Temari descended upon him, furious. Was that at all necessary? We could be on our way to the tower by now and you pull this. The Cloud Ninja attacked again, this time in a different formation. Kankuro ran ahead, preparing for the worst as the Kumo Nin scattered a huge net of wire over the scrub field, entangling trees and the sand team. Miyosuke hadn't been expecting it, and tugged frantically upon realizing his boomerang had been snagged in the worst of the copper wire knot. Kankuro, a little help here please. This is your doing, you moron. His puppet was out, at wires, but Kankuro paused in his work, noting that severing the wrong wires would only tighten the trap's grip on them. The Cloud Nin circled in wait, eyes hungry for AS. Temari had the more direct approach. Her iron fan opened, revealing 3 moons, and she S with a frustrated cry, freeing herself from the tangle, astounding the offended Kumo team. 2 of them were at her a moment later, one wielding a short sword and the other a scythe. She was more than a match for them, but the male portion of her team was still stuck. Gaara could only watch, numbed and unable to move. The last of the waiting Cloud Nin turned his attention to the struggling of Miyosuke and Kankuro, still caught up in the snare they had laid out. Hey, his eyes were set on Miyosuke, tell me something. The mousy antagonist glared indignantly, and hating karma. How does a piece of bread feel after it's put in a toaster? Crap. Kankuro muttered under his breath, withdrawing Karasu only moments before an electrical jutsu ran through the copper wires, giving him and Miyosuke a powerful shock that singed the tips of their hair. Temari was wide-eyed and overwhelmed. If half of her team was finished, then she wasn't far behind. She gave a fierce wallop to the head of the Nin, swiping at her with the sword, an instant knockout. The other, unfortunately, was faster than she and landing more blows. Something in Gaara's head clicked then, some sort of subliminal signal to take action, even though he had no business being there to begin with. He was still obligated by a resounding memory forever imprinted in his B. He could finally move. Kunai shot forward, connecting with the 2 remaining Kumo Nin. They ducked back in a panicked shock, removing the knives, as a red-haired ninja appeared on the side of the field with crazed eyes. Temari stood very still, unsure of what was going on, and whether the newcomer was singularly after the Cloud team. A wave of sand crashed down, knocking back the Cloud Ninja with thunderous force. They reasserted their wits and counted together, one leaping over Gaara and the other going for a low, finishing blow to the gut. The knives rained down in unison, Gaara to pieces, or rather, the sand clone he had substituted himself with. They skidded to a halt and turned back, running to their fallen teammate as sand closed in from all around them, the air, ground and clone that they had shredded. Gaara stood at the center of the clearing, his shaking hand raised in anticipation as he levitated the individuals trapped in their respective sand coffins. They were crying in fear. Kankuro and Miyosuke had come to, and watched in confusion as the unknown shinobi closed his fist, crushing the Cloud Ninja into nothing more than a short drizzle of B. Temari shielded her face from the red rain, horrified. Maybe she and her teammates were next. Kankuro and Miyosuke scrambled to free themselves as the mysterious red-haired shinobi stood in silence. Temari didn't make a move to help them, fearing to provoke the sand manipulator. Sand. He can control sand. Her heart missed a beat as her fan folded over. Temari took a hesitant step, wondering if there was even the faintest, most minuscule of possibilities that the boy she was looking at could be her. I missed you. Gaara's confession was the lowest of whispers. It coaxed Temari closer after hearing it. Somehow she knew, and she was sure that, as he tripped over the ruined wires in shock, that Kankuro knew as well. He was aware that staying and speaking to them would only lead to disaster, not here. Not now. But he would. Gaara would mend his broken past, mend the wound in his heart that was the absence of his F&B. The sand team stood motionless and would have missed Gaara's escape via whirlwind had they blinked. Gaara returned to the stream and washed the bee from his face, reciting the names of his brother and sister until the words were well practiced on his lips. He would have felt ecstatically happy to see them had they not been on an enemy team. The shock was wearing off by the time he had collected the water rations he had left there and returned to his teammates, who he suddenly had a new urgency to protect. Night had fallen and Sakura sat in a dazed stupor beside her teammates. They had been preparing to settle down for the evening, late that afternoon, wanting to celebrate the defeat of a team of rain ninja who they had successfully ambushed for their heaven scroll. When they had stopped to rest was when the grass nin appeared. She shivered at the memory, remembering how close of a battle it had been. In fact, it had been no contest really. The Kusa nin had been alone but he had nearly killed them all. He called himself Orochimaru. Sakura rested her chin on her knees, hugging them to her. See, what did he want with Sasuke-kun? She hadn't a clue. And to make matters even worse, was that they had handed over their heaven scroll, believing that at the time to be what he was after. He burned it on the spot, to their horror, and then attacked again. Sakura considered it to be a miracle that they were still alive. Sasuke lay beside her, completely drained from the fight and sported an odd mark on his N where he had been bitten by the rogue ninja. Kiba slept uncomfortably on her opposite side, also low on chakra reserves, and with a wounded arm after he had been ambushed by a terrifyingly large snake. Akamaru sat whimpering next to him, licking his face. With a sigh, Sakura pulled the small dog into her arms. Not now, Akamaru, he needs to rest. They'll be okay. I'll look after them. The dog whined in response. The pink-haired girl closed her eyes briefly, but they snapped open a moment later. She knew that she had to keep alert. Falling asleep would leave them open to an ambush, although she believed she had done a good job of hiding her team in a gap of roots below a large tree. Their discovery would lead to trouble and she was in no condition to fight. Sakura watched vigilantly with Akamaru, praying for the morning to come. Naya. Naruto rolled over, blinking the sleep from his blue eyes. He bumped into someone. Gaara looked down at him, expressionless. The dark circles beneath his eyes were more pronounced, as if he had been up for an excruciatingly long time. The blonde sat up and stretched, feeling his mouth automatically curve into a well-rested smile. Hey, what's up? Naruto's speech was slurred through his yawn. You and Haku-kun were nearly when you fought that grass ninja, remember? Gaara sighed, hoping he would at least recall that much of what had transpired. The boy's cerulean eyes lit up with the memory. Oh yeah, that's right. How long was I out? 2 days. 2 days. Naruto was flabbergasted and wished that it was all a joke. Gaara, he knew, seldom joked about anything, especially serious matters like these. After a moment of horrified rambling, the blonde doubled over in pain, clawing at his stomach. Gaara's eyes narrowed at the sight, wondering if maybe his teammates had been injured after all. It isn't as if I can detect internal injuries. The QB container's stomach whined loudly and he frowned at Gaara. Ugh. I'm starving. I can't believe it's been that long since the fight. The red-haired boy dismissed his theory on Naruto having any internal injuries. We barely have any food left and we're saving it for Haku-kun. Oh fine, but you could've. Naruto's eyes flickered curiously to the still sleeping form of Haku beside him and guilt washed over his face. Is he alright? No. Gaara glanced over to the dark-haired boy as well. He had a high fever for over a day, but it seems he's overcome it. Though he hasn't woken once. The blonde boy gulped, staring down at Haku whose face was somehow not peaceful. He certainly was paler than usual and it was plain to see he had been very ill. Naruto petted his unconscious teammate's head worriedly, forgetting his hunger. When do you think he'll wake up? He felt the need to ask. Gaara shrugged, I have no idea. Soon, maybe, once he's had enough rest. Naruto nodded glumly, not understanding how Haku's health could fail him in the middle of the Chunin exam. He thought of Sato briefly, wondering if there was a virus going around. If that idiot turns out to be the germ bag behind this, I'm going outside. Gaara spoke abruptly, his voice hinting that Naruto should join him. The blonde stood up reflexively, trying to overcome his growing concerns for Haku's state of health. He followed quietly after the red-haired boy, only realizing that they had been resting in a cave once they had gotten out of it. Gaara didn't even bother to hole up the entrance behind them. Don't set off any traps. Gaara's warning came a bit too late, as he watched Naruto dodge a hail of kunai that had sprung from a nettle of leaves, where he had unwittingly stepped on a tripwire. He sighed at his friend, expecting as much. Yeesh, you could give a bit more warning than that, Gaara. The blonde boy followed after his teammate, peeved. What? Were you trying to scare off any army or something while we were out? It's a possibility, Gaara said blandly, finding he was unable to smirk as he normally would at a moment like this. He absently wandered back to the stream as Naruto followed him, wary for traps. Gaara sat down by the water and splashed a handful of it over his tired face. Naruto plopped down beside him and immersed his entire head into the cool water. His teammate sighed in exasperation. The blonde resurfaced, grinning and refreshed. It was then Gaara considered telling Naruto about his encounter with his long-lost siblings. Though he was aware it would probably come as a shock, since he had never spoken about them before in his time with Naruto and Haku. He felt torn. It was horrible and never before had he been so hopelessly confused in his life. Gaara decided against it. Naruto had a lot to deal with at the moment and forcing his problems onto the blonde would only complicate things further. He'd find out eventually anyway. Maybe we should just wake Haku-kun up, Naruto suggested thoughtfully as they stood. You know, give him a little nudge. I bet he's got enough energy to at least have us get to the tower. For once, Gaara couldn't argue with him. Haku would have to get going anyway. They simply didn't have any more time to allow him to recover. The red-haired boy nodded solemnly in response and Naruto raised his eyebrows at him for a moment, but then shrugged, glad Gaara didn't deem his idea foolish. They returned to their temporary hideout where Haku remained in a deep sleep. It felt like a crime to wake him, being that Gaara had spoken of how terribly ill he had been, but it needed to be done. Naruto kneeled down next to the dark-haired boy and gently shook his shoulder. Haku-kun, it's time for us to get going. Haku's eyes opened slowly and his pain was visible. It took a moment for them to adjust to the light before the image of Naruto's whisked face came into view. Gaara sighed inwardly, hoping he had enough energy for the continuation of their journey. The blonde boy helped Haku sit up and let him have a sip of water from his canteen. I don't know about this, he's still as weak as a kitten and he can barely see straight. Haku was cross-eyed at the moment. How are you feeling? Gaara couldn't help but notice the dark-haired boy shaking slightly. It wasn't comforting. I feel like I was hit by a train. Haku's voice was hoarse, but humorous. Naruto grinned, glad that he wasn't the zombie version of himself he had been expecting. We kind of lost 2 days after the fight with the crazy guy, Naruto announced sheepishly, so we better haul her in the next few days or we'll be late and, yeah. He didn't want to upset Haku, but he was a bit late on the uptake. Haku's storm-colored eyes lowered in shame. I'm sorry. For what? Naruto barked, indignant. You've got no reason to apologize, Haku-kun. I've been a burden, he said softly. I've slowed us down. Technically you've both been burdens, Gaara pointed out and his teammates looked hurt. It's not something to be remorseful about. We're here and have both scrolls. If we go now there's little chance that we'll be disqualified at all. Their expressions brightened considerably. Well, you think you're up to it, Haku-kun. Naruto's mood was as sunny as usual. He nodded, sliding his legs beneath him and stood awkwardly. He looked terrible, but if he believed that he was able to continue his teammates weren't about to stop him. I have a question though. Haku's eyebrows knitted together in a frown. While we were knocked out, what happened? Were there any other shinobi that you encountered, Gaara-kun? A team of Cloud, he answered succinctly, walking ahead of them into the sunlit brush of the forest. I crushed them before they could get too close. It was only half of the truth, but the truth nonetheless. Ah, Haku nodded in understanding and had no further comment on the matter. Naruto walked beside him, guardedly, keeping watch for any other ninja, as improbable as another encounter would be. Haku felt his chakra slowly begin to return to him, but it was painfully low. His limbs ached as he followed his teammates up into the treetops, and he hoped that he would never again slow them down. At that time Kabuto arrived at the tower. He bade farewell to Team 7, whom he had escorted there after stumbling upon them in the forest. The silver-haired boy pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose as he pulled open one of the double doors and went inside silently, as if expected. He was. Ah, so you've brought the information, Kabuto-kun. Orochimaru's voice hung slippery in the air as he leaned against a wall, his arms folded across his sea. Kabuto smirked darkly, holding up one of his cards. Yes, Orochimaru-sama. It's all here, the information on Uchiha Sasuke. Orochimaru accepted the card offered to him, before he asked, and what of the other? Young Haku-kun. Kabuto frowned. I'm afraid I was only able to track down Sasuke. Haku and his teammates have remained elusive. His smirk returned, wider than ever, though I should have no problem collecting information on him. He seems to be one of the favorites of this village. No matter, Orochimaru waved the subject away, not caring very much. He had seen what he wanted from both boys. I will be watching both of them with interest. It's quite surprising that they have both survived. Kabuto remained quiet, his eyes were unblinking behind his glasses. The Hokage knows that I'm here. Orochimaru smiled sadistically to himself, recalling how Anko had confronted him the night before. He isn't foolish enough to stop the exams, not when I'm having so much fun. What are your orders? Kabuto asked. Do not let the third stage of the exam be interrupted, Orochimaru said simply, vanishing into the shadows. I'm looking forward to it. The silver-haired boy nodded and then moved on, unable to suppress his gleeful smirk of how easily things had gone according to plan. On their way to the tower, with Naruto heading up the front with an unprecedented speed, they had run into a team of Rain Nin. Haku had been, and unknowingly so to the other team, unable to fight. So naturally his teammates were a tad overprotective of him. Gaara and Naruto trampled the fools trying to confuse them with genjutsu, leaving them to their misery and woe, but with their scrolls intact. That was bullying, you know. Haku was highly disapproving of their actions. We could have just left. There was no need for a standoff. Yeah, well, bullying or whatever it was, they attacked us first. Naruto protested. They had it coming. Gaara silently agreed with him, leaving Haku to follow behind them, troubled, wondering if they were planning on demolishing every team they encountered on their way to the tower. The tower, which had appeared absurdly far away during the daytime, was much closer than they had anticipated, to their relief. The moon was high in the sky once they had gotten there, and they had not been intercepted by any other shinobi since their battering of the Rain Nin. They entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The double doors closed with a rusted creak behind them. It was a wide, vacant room. Moonlight filtered into the dark, echoing room from beneath the door and small windows placed high on the walls. It was not what they had expected and quite underwhelming. This place is empty. Naruto went ahead to state the obvious. What do you suppose we do now? Look up there. Haku pointed to a large sign hung on the opposite wall, which, after reading it, left him even more baffled. Gaara remained silent, fighting the urge to let his eyes slip shut and fall asleep on his feet. There's a word missing on that sign. It doesn't make any sense, Naruto declared, annoyed. It wasn't as if his teammates hadn't noticed. By now they were exhausted and there was little energy left in them to think up any conclusions. Haku, as he often was the exception to that rule. I suggest we open our scrolls now, Haku decided, fighting a yawn. We'll open them at the same time. Naruto wasn't sure about the idea, but Anko-sensei said we couldn't open them until we reached the tower. Gaara finished for him. We're here now. Haku nodded. Yes, we've followed the rules, so we have to take it up until the last step. He riffled through his blue GI and retrieved the Earth Scroll, and Naruto watched apprehensively as Gaara displayed their Heaven Scroll, wondering what the outcome would be. Together, Haku's gulp was audible. Even he was just a bit nervous. He and the red-haired boy opened the scrolls in unison, finding the writing on each to be perplexing. After a moment, Naruto s the scrolls from their hands knowingly, letting them fall to the floor with a flutter. His teammates frowned at him. What? Naruto folded his arms. You want whoever you're summoning to land on you. They're summoning. Haku realized that he was in fact correct. He would have eventually noticed what they were, but Naruto had more experience with summoning and recognized it first. A cloud of smoke billowed from the scrolls on the floor, and after a few seconds of observation a figure became visible. The three of them gawked in shock. Jiraiya blinked down at them in silence. He then broke into a fit of hysterical laughter at the sight of his bewildered students' faces. Naruto, Haku and Gaara stood, nonplussed, even as the Sennin fell to the floor, tears welling in his eyes as he chortled like a madman. Ero-sensei. Naruto was the fastest to recover and vocalize, "What the hell are you doing here?" Jiraiya stood, wiping at his eyes. Oh, well, as it turns out, I would have shown up here to watch you in the next round anyway. But I managed to strike a deal with Hokage-sama a week ago in which if I were to meet you here I'd be free of my community service. Oh joy. Gaara droned. He was honestly glad to see a familiar face, but just too tired to express it. He fell to the floor abruptly, grateful he no longer needed to defy gravity. Haku and Naruto followed suit, falling to their butts and longing for rest. Jiraiya smirked at his pupils. Pooped out already. How difficult was it in there? Naruto and Haku exchanged a long glance with each other, before Naruto proceeded to recap their struggle. He outlined their original plan, getting their scrolls, fishing, and the grass ninja who ultimately defeated them but left them alive. Right. Jiraiya was livid after hearing the story, although they weren't sure why. Tell me, did you find out this grass ninja's name? Haku vaguely recalled his introduction to the ninja, which had also been his farewell. Gingerly, he touched the seal on his N, but decided not to bring attention to it, for he himself was unsure of what it was for. He said that his name was Orochimaru, I believe. Haku confirmed and recoiled in shock as Jiraiya reeled away from them in an infuriated frenzy of derogatory comments and babble including phrases like, "They're my students," and, "I'll tear him right of his filthy snake skin." Gaara gave him an inquiring look a few minutes later, after he had calmed down. "You know him?" Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. "More than I'd like to, believe me." "Now tell me, did anything happen when you fought him? Anything at all?" His voice was dangerously serious and it was frightening. Haku still didn't bring up the mark on his N, being that another question was on his mind. Yes actually, Jiraiya's gaze was fixed on him after that. Naruto-kun used a technique against him called the Rasengan. Naruto's cheeks tinted. He had forgotten about it. When did he start using such a powerful move? Gaara's glare connected fully with the back of Naruto's blonde head now that he knew what he had been doing during the past few weeks. Jiraiya's anger warped into a surprised face. He did. He looked down at his blue-eyed student. "You did?" "Yeah, I did." Naruto's nostrils flared in annoyance. "You think I wouldn't be able to?" "Truthfully, yes." The toad sage sighed, further agitating his hard-working pupil. "Yeah, well, I had to use the Kyuubi's chakra to do it twice." Jiraiya's eyes widened after the word, twice, and Naruto didn't miss it either, to his delight, "But now, it's funny. I can't feel my chakra at all. It's like the fox just vanished or something," he added in puzzlement. Jiraiya raised one white eyebrow. "Oh. That is something. I better take a look." Haku and Gaara watched in clinical curiosity as Naruto removed his jacket, and with a small dose of chakra, made the seal on his stomach appear. The toad hermit kneeled down, observing it carefully. He knew what the problem was immediately. "That bastard," he muttered, focusing chakra into his fingers. "I was afraid he might use something like this on you. Good thing I can take care of it now." Naruto gave him a look of bafflement. "You mean he did something to the seal?" Jiraiya nodded. "Yes, but it isn't permanently damaging. It's preventing the Kyuubi's chakra from mixing with yours at a stable rate. Easily fixable. Now I want you to look over at your teammates." "Why? Just shut up and do it, squirt." "All right. Fine." Naruto's irritated gaze traveled over to Haku and Gaara, who appeared equally as puzzled as he. "Good." Jiraiya smirked to himself, drawing his right hand back. "Next, count back from 100. This is so stupid. How is this gonna fix? Get on with it." "Sheesh. Fine." Naruto blinked at Gaara, who looked amused. 100, 99, 98. Five-pronged unsealing. Naruto felt something into his abdomen. Perhaps he should have expected it, knowing his sneaky mentor well enough by then. Jiraiya's hand was lit with radiant chakra and it burned off the restraint that had been applied to Naruto's stomach. Jiraiya promptly stepped back to observe a winded Naruto. He had fallen on his rear to the floor. The 5 inhibitors surrounding the seal of the demon fox vanished and Jiraiya nodded, quite pleased with himself. "Well, that about does it. You don't need to count any more." "I wasn't gonna keep going anyway, you jerk." Naruto yowled, trying to recover. "What the heck was that for?" You can use the Kyuubi's chakra again, that's what it was for, the sage smirked, turning to his other two visibly amazed students. Now that you're all here and well, my advice would be for you to rest and prepare for battle. Ero-sensei. What now, Naruto? Can you get us some ramen, maybe? Naruto's face was pathetic but cute. We're all starving. Gaara frowned, not understanding when Naruto and Haku had picked up that cute pout that could sway others to their whim. Gaara was totally immune to the tactic but also incapable of using it. Jiraiya frowned down at them as they sat huddled on the cement floor in the dark of the night, begging for food. Ah, alright, but quit it with the face. Naruto's pout was replaced with an expression of delight. So far, he felt that the Chunin exam was the coolest thing that he had ever participated in while in Konoha. And the best part was that his friends were beside him. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.